GL1 and welcome to STEM Class RC Car Part 3. Today I'm going to primarily be behind the camera showing you all the things I want you to see and learn about these various RC cars and batteries that I have to show you today. Alright, so here are some of the RC cars I'm going to show you today, and a lot of what we're going to do is a lot of technology comparisons and explanation. And we're going to start over here with this 2008-ish time period Nico Striker truck. Now, Nico was a company that was founded in the 60s and really was selling a lot of RC cars through Radio Shack, Sears, and Toys R Us, K&B Toys, if any of you remember that. Into the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So I made it so I could take the body off easily here, and would have screws from underneath in this case. And that's important because not everything does work that way. So in here is the motor, and you can see it has a little bit of some air vents there. This is your switch from underneath. You would turn that on and off. And then these are transistors. These are called FET transistors. They handle the power that goes to the motor, so they get really hot. And what they have is they have these aluminum heat sinks on them to cool them down. And you have one integrated circuit here that probably controls the speed and the steering. And an integrated circuit is really just a lot of transistors and just putting on-off switches basically just for control. And then these are your wires that go to your servo. The servo motor for steering is in here. And then here you have capacitors and various sizes of capacitors, and the little round ones there, those are resistors. And what's important to note here is that this is a pretty big electronic circuit board compared to some of the things you'll see later. What is good about this is it's much more durable. So if you have a voltage spike or you put even sometimes the wrong battery, it can handle it. Newer radio-controlled vehicles that you get, now at Target or Walmart that are like New Bright, very small integrated circuit chips. Everything here is just small on a little board. And if you're off by a volt, it'll pop. And the servo here is actually, this whole thing underneath here is a motor and gear system. And it's a little difficult to tell, but right in here there's some solder points for the wires. And they go to this green housing, this box here. That's where the gears and the motor are. And then that's going to turn these relatively large, heavy wheels. So let's going to get a little bit more detailed into that. Here is a servo motor and gearbox. So this lever on top, you hear that? That is, I'm turning the motor that is attached to a lot of gears. Now the reason why it makes that sound is there's a great reduction in the gear ratio there. So what it is, you have a small motor that is going through various machinations with the gearing to create very high torque so that it can not have any problems moving this lever, whether it's turning large wheels or moving really anything you might want something to be moved. And actually, I'm going to show you later, maybe not this show, but a radio-controlled Lego vehicle that I custom made, which uses some servos in some creative ways. And here are the wires. So if you remember from show number 2, these actually went to a little plug. Now the plug is clipped off, but you can still attach these. You see the little holes inside, and they will plug into that brain, the receiver, and the receiver then will control this servo motor, and that's, like I said, that's what we have in there. So underneath, I'm going to show you this here. So this is where the battery goes. And of course, there's all kinds of batteries that have been used with RC cars over the years. And this is a 49 megahertz frequency, and not as common as the 27 megahertz. And if you note here from the other show where I showed you on the Camaro vehicle, when you moved one wheel, the other wheel moved in the opposite direction because it had a differential gearing system in there that allowed the outside wheel to spin faster than the inside wheel on turns. Well, this doesn't have that. So this has the wheels constantly move all the time. The reason why these aren't worn down that much is because it doesn't get played with that much. And the battery pack that came with this was one like this. This is a NiCad. It's old. This is probably 15 years old at least. I charged it up overnight and nothing happened. And that will happen. You know, NiCads, they have a lifespan, and eventually the chemicals get used up inside and they won't come on anymore. But I do have a lithium battery. Now this is, as you can see, it's 6.4 volt, not 6. And that's going to be okay with this because the electronics inside here can handle the extra 0.4 volts. It's not going to burn anything out. So the way this goes in is that you let's see here, push that in there. Yeah, you actually have to line it up just right because see these little tabs, they hit these tabs here, and you have to line up. That's a positive symbol and there's a positive symbol there. So you want to line that up and lock that in. Now, because it was meant for a larger battery, as you can see, it would be in this way, and then you would turn that here with like a coin. They always make it so that it's a slot like a penny or something, and you can just turn it, and then that would hold it in. But I don't have, this motor is shorter, battery shorter, so, but it still will work. This here is your fine adjustment for your steering. It's not on the remote like it was on that Camaro. It's actually a manual steering adjustment. So as you turn that, it does little tiny adjustments to the gear in there. It moves it over, and that adjusts, makes sure your steering servo is going straight. This is only rear-wheel drive, so these flow freely. And we turn that on, and we have a remote here. And that's the sound, I'm sure familiar to many of you, of the gearbox and the motor. And then you just move, you know, here's your remote, here's your left and right, and go forward and reverse. So if you drive a radio-controlled vehicle and you do a lot of going forward really fast and then slamming it into reverse to stop it, you're going to use up your battery a lot faster because these vehicles might weigh anywhere between 1.5 pounds and 5 pounds, and some of them, you know, up to 11, 12 pounds. And that stopping and slowing it down uses up a lot of power to do that. So there's a lot of heat and a lot of battery loss. So this setup here is, I can tell from here that it's a pretty small motor. It's probably called a 240, RS 240, and that there's sizes like the common big size is 540, and that's on a lot of larger vehicles, and even like a 280, a 240, you know, a 320. Those motors can actually have different windings in them and have different power profiles, whether they're meant to run longer periods of time or have more torque. But so you see this a little bit partially rounded here. That's an indication of the motor and the motor size. Actually, if you were to continue that as a circle, that's how big the motor it would kind of be, about that circular size right there. So maybe about 1 inch across, and then that's going to go down. There's a gear in here, and then that's going to go down to other gears, and that's going to attach to the axle. And that's, you know, without taking it apart, I just know from experience that that's the general design of that vehicle. So that's all right. The other thing to notice on this actually has no suspension. So there's no springs. It's just a really simple vehicle. You know, the tires have a little bit of pneumatic capabilities, and you can kind of squish them in. It's not rubber. It's kind of a soft and even kind of a hard plastic, in my opinion. And that's indicative of being pretty cheap, actually. You know, when they don't really put a lot of effort into something, then that's usually it's kind of a harder plastic. So I try not to buy RC cars like that. A lot of the RC vehicles I get are secondhand, and then they're broken, and then I fix them, make them work again. This is the antenna. So if you'll note, that, like I was explaining in the last video, these vehicles are older and they use antennas, larger antennas. They're not like 2.4 gigahertz, which have really tiny antennas, so small that you don't even see it. So it does work better if you extend the antenna. And then this is the wire that is the antenna on this vehicle. And then that is looped through here and then soldered in. We see right here is actually the radio frequency tuner. And it's a magnet, and it has some wire around it. And that actually, it can be tuned, and that can actually tune the frequency. But you don't want to mess with it because it is tuned specifically to that remote. And this wire connects to that. And so that's how that works. Now, I'm going to move over to something a little bit more sophisticated. And that's this Grand Cherokee RC vehicle. And this one is actually very indicative of the early 90s. So this may be newer than that, but it's hard to always find the date on these things or even look them up because a lot of times, like I said, I get them used and then I just get them working. Many times they don't come with a remote, but when they are this, if you go to a used store and there's an RC car there and there's no visible antenna, then it's probably a vehicle that runs in the gigahertz frequency range as far as the remote, and you cannot replace the remote. The vehicle is just parts at that point. You won't be able to actually get another remote that will work with it because once it pairs up, it's paired with that remote, and if the remote is missing, it will, you can't play with it with the remote. These vehicles are older. They use like the 27 or the 49 megahertz, so they have a longer antenna. If you lose your remote and you have a bunch of 49 or 27 megahertz remotes around to other vehicles, oftentimes you just try it and see if you get one that works. And that is what I do frequently. And actually, I did that with this vehicle. So this vehicle, I know in the early 90s that New Bright was making vehicles just like this. So like this could be from the early 90s. It could be later because this design lasted quite a while. I think it's a little bit actually newer than that because in the early 90s, they had the softer rubber tires, and this is not that soft. They're still pretty hard. But what it does have, as you can see, it has a spring suspension, so you have some dampening. And what's good about dampening is when you're going over bumps, it allows the wheels to stay in contact with the ground better. And that's how dampening works. So when you have shocks on a real car or on a truck, the purpose of the shocks is to keep it in contact with the road when you go over bumps so you still maintain control. So when you have shocks on your front like this, now this is not four-wheel drive. It's just a rear-wheel drive truck. But the dampening helps the front wheel stay in contact with the ground. So when you're steering, it's still going to stay in contact. And then it has two springs on the back. And they, to see those work. And what we've seen so far is just vehicles that have one gear, one speed. This actually has a second gear. So you have a switch here. It has a high and low. And actually, inside the transmission, there actually is a gear. It actually slides over and hits one gear or another. This is the motor housing. So that probably is a 280 size motor. and then it has a big heat sink outside. The other vehicle over there, there's no heat sink. If you'll note, really, there's no heat sink. It's just got a little bit of those, the open air to just get a little bit of cooling. But the body is even on top of it. So they're really not concerned about heat with that motor too much because the vehicle's light, not that fast, and so it's just not going to generate that much heat. This vehicle, with a battery in it, it's going to weigh, about 5 pounds. So that the other truck is probably about 2. So about 5 pounds. It's more powerful when you have the different gears. So there's a lot more going on with this. So the motor's going to be working harder to move this larger vehicle with larger tires as well. And it also has a more powerful battery that goes in here. So that was a 6-volt battery that went on the other vehicle. This takes a 9.6. So there's a 9.6 volt battery there. And I have one I can show you. Here's this is a nickel metal hydride 9.6 volt battery. And this is also nickel metal hydride in there. So that, that plug just connects inside there. And here you have your steering tie rods there. You see that? And actually it's metal. It has like a metal arm that comes out there, and these are like a Teflon plastic, so it's a tough plastic, or nylon actually in this case. There's your steering adjustment, and you can see the whole thing is floating. The whole axle is floating, and so you get, it's not independent suspension like that Camaro, but you definitely get some movement for greater contact with the road. And this was a vehicle that I just found at a secondhand store, so I had to use a remote. Okay, that actually, and that's how that closes, like that. And I have a remote to a Bugatti, a fast lane Bugatti that is the same frequency. So I'm going to show you. Let's see how that switches here. There we go. And then this has a switch for on. And now you hear that? That's the servos turning those wheels, and then you're. And I'm going to show you all these cars moving later in the video, but you can see it's got enough torque. It moves. You can see the axle actually flexing, and see that how you turn the one wheel and the other wheel moves in the opposite direction. So it has a differential gear. So it's again more sophisticated. So when it goes around turns, when the outside when it's making a turn, the outside wheel can spin faster than the inside to keep the wear and tear on the tires down, and also just give it more control, better steering control. Because when you have, like with this vehicle, when you have both wheels moving in the same direction, it's pushing through the turn, and both wheels are pushing at the same speed. So it's going to kind of bounce around a turn. This won't bounce around a turn. It'll make a smooth turn transition. This is, like I said, this is a early 90s New Bright design, and it's much heavier. And I'm going to show you this is a New Bright vehicle here. This is a Corvette, and I actually changed the body on it. This actually was a Fast and Furious car, but I really liked that Corvette, and the thing is when I bought this Corvette, it was slow. Actually, it came to a different chassis, different electronics, and it was slow, and no ZR1 Corvette should be slow. So we had to remedy that, so I took the Fast and Furious car, and I had to modify the frame a little bit to hold the Corvette body, and it was made to be able to do that. So I was able to move the pegs. These are the pegs that attach to the body. On the original vehicle, the wheels were, you could move those too. They were more forward here, and the pegs were forward, so that the Fast and Furious car body was, had a different placement for where the body attached. And what I did is I drilled holes in the Corvette body, because this did not attach. What it did is, you see how it has these little screw areas here on the bottom. That's how it attached the original chassis, but I wanted it to attach to this, which uses the little clips. So this one had plastic clips. So I had these little plastic clips, so you would push the body on through the holes that I drilled on the body, and then you would push the clips through and stay on. But what I want you to see here is I want you to see the difference in the electronics. So this is all very integrated circuit electronics, very small, very light, compared, again, take a look at that. So, you could see everything's very small. There's no capacitors visible. This is very heavy, very big capacitors. These are the wires that go to the steering. This has only 2 wires that go to the steering. So you really just have a positive and negative that go to a motor, and that motor just turns one way, click, and then turns the other, click. All the way to the left or all the way to the right. It's not what we learned with the Camaro digitally proportional, where you could gradually turn it. This doesn't gradually turn. It's all the way to the left, all the way to the right. So it's not as sophisticated. This has more wires, more control, and it has some digitally proportional aspect to it, to where it does have a little bit of some gradual turning, because it's more sophisticated electronics. This also, you really can't mess around with the voltage on it with the battery. Now, fortunately, you don't have to really worry about that, and I'll show you why. But I also want you to see, so all the motor and everything is just inside this little housing here. So just right in here, you have your drive shaft. Your motor is in this housing here. So it's not sophisticated at all. It's usually just a motor and one gear to one gear, and that gear turns a straight axle. This does not have a differential. They both move at the same time. So again, not very sophisticated. Very light car. I mean, this is maybe half a pound. So you can see, they've gotten, what they've done is they've just made everything lighter, so the electronics are lighter as well, and they can be lighter so that they don't have to handle as much power to move this vehicle. So the electronics can be more delicate in a way, because they're not moving as much weight. Also, this is your antenna. See how small that is? So you would never even see that, because this is a 2.4 gigahertz antenna that tunes to the vehicle. And the battery is underneath this circuit board. So the way you charge this up, and this is kind of nice, you just plug it, it's a USB, and maybe some of you have seen this, you plug it in and it charges the vehicle. You actually push the switch over, and then it's in charging mode. The battery's under there, and it's a lithium battery, so you should have several years of being able to use that. All right, now I want to go over to something over here. I'm going to pause this video, and I'm going to switch some things around and show you where we're going to go next. Okay, so this truck here I probably got in 1990. This is my third radio-controlled vehicle, my first being that Batmobile that I mentioned that goes forward and turns in reverse. Then I got a truck called Big Kicker, And I traded that in because I saw this one it was called Big Bubba. And my uncle had one. I saw it and I thought, wow, that one's four-wheel drive, and it's just bigger, and it's got these nice squishy, softer rubber tires. And I put all these stickers on it, the skulls and this skull, and it's got glow-in-the-dark paint. And I covered all of the parts, like this is chrome. I covered it in metal tape so that if it flips over, it won't get scratched. I put the metal tape here. So for over 30 years, this vehicle has been in really good shape. What's most important, though, are the electronics. So I'm going to show you that here. Now, this truck also has the gear, high and low. Right now it's in low gear. You can see there's an H. And flip that over. And it's very heavy duty made. It has one motor, one relatively small motor. I believe it is a 280. Might be a 360, but pretty small for a vehicle that's pretty heavy. And it runs on a 7.2 volt battery. So that fits in here, one of these big batteries. Originally, it had a 9 volt in here that controlled the brain of it. So that would receive the transmitting signals. That was for the receiver in the truck. And I think the steering as well. And then the battery would do all the motors, the motor power, for going forward. Because it is a heavy vehicle, and it was actually pretty fast. I think it went about 12, 13 miles an hour. You can also see it's very heavily duty made with metal pieces here. It's all metal connectors. And in the back, you have some pretty big gearboxes in there. And if you'll notice, when you turn one wheel, all the wheels move, and they move in the opposite direction on the other side. So it has a differential gear in here, and then what it has two drive shafts that go to the front, and it has independent suspension. See that? It moves independently of the other side. And there's what's called a dog bone in there that attaches to the drive shaft. So, let's see that. Let's see. We see the drive shaft. Not on, oh wait, no, I think there is a place we can. Some of these vehicles you can see the drive. There we go. That's it. Okay, so if you look down in here, right in there, my finger's in the way. All right, right there. There it is. Okay, that's the drive shaft, and there's one on each side. So I don't know if we can see that moving at all. There we go. Yes, we can. Okay, let's get in there. So we're going to see that move. There's a little, see that move? There, see that spin? So when the motor is in here, spins gears through a differential, and then that goes to the drive shaft, and that drive shaft connects all the way up in here, and that turns this wheel, so it's four-wheel drive. Okay, and if you push both wheels at the same time, you get that gear sound, because now it's really using the power. All right, and I have this, it's on, I believe. So, yep. All right, so here's the remote for this vehicle, the current remote, I should say. And so it's a pistol grip, so you pull to go forward, push to go back. It's got the hesitation because it's got the electronic speed control in there. And then your steering is this foam wheel here, and there's your steering. Now, what I have to tell you is this vehicle is so old, unfortunately the electronics went bad. It wouldn't work anymore. So I had to take it apart, and for about $50 I got new electronics. Now there's a lot involved in doing that. They're lighter, they're smaller, they can handle more power. So you can put a 9.6 volt battery on this, a more powerful battery, and probably even up to 12 volts if you had one that would fit inside the vehicle, and it would just go faster because the new speed control and the brain and receiver can handle the higher voltage. So I had to change the remote for Big Bubba. This is not the original remote. This is actually MRC Top Gun. This is a boat remote. So I had an extra boat remote, and I wrote Big Bubba on there so I don't forget what it's for. And then I had to come up with my own voltage solution. So what I did is it needed 9 volts. So I put 2 9-volt batteries in what's called parallel. So if you put them in series, it would be 9 plus 9, it would be 18 volts. But if you connect both the negative and the positive together to where the positive and negative of battery attaches, then you're just going to get 9 and 9 at the same time. So you're going to get what's called more amperage. So that way I still only get 9 volts, because if I put on 18, it'll burn the remote out. But it only gets 9 volts, but it's using 2 batteries, so it'll last longer. Okay. So what I had to do is, when the electronics go bad in a vehicle, you can't, the servo on these old vintage RCs that are like 30 years old, the servo motor is actually integrated in with the plastic framework of the vehicle. So this, you see this is our differential switch that we have on the other vehicles. This no longer works. It doesn't do anything really that can't be done from the remote, because this is not attached to the servo that came with the vehicle. The servo that came with the vehicle was integrated into the plastic. So what I had to do is I had to get a separate servo, like this one that I had here. So, okay, and I had to cut away the plastic and come up with a way to creatively attach this turning arm to these steering arms. And I was able to do that, and I've done that several times, but it is a lot of work, and it's risky. I mean, you could end up messing up and ruining everything, but I'm pretty good at it, and so I was able to integrate a new servo into the steering. Now, this vehicle, when originally had it, did not have digitally proportional steering. It was just all to the left or all to the right. But now, because it's better electronics, you see, I can steer it very carefully, and the speed as well. I can go slow, and then I can go faster. And that's full speed in low gear. Now, if I switch to high gear, actually a whole different transmission. I mean, you can hear that it's faster. You see the wheels move faster. So that's pretty cool that now it's much more sophisticated, because again, when the original electronics only allowed it to go full speed forward in high gear or low gear. So you did have 2 different speeds, but now you have an infinite number of speeds, because you see, even in high gear, I can move it very slow, and then go faster and faster and faster. So I have a lot greater control with the speed and with the steering. So it's a much more sophisticated vehicle now, and because it's my first real favorite type of RC truck, I was so happy to get it working again. I couldn't let it go where it's just, it doesn't work anymore. So that's how that works. And like I had explained with the Camaro, these more sophisticated remotes allow you to adjust your steering. You take a little screwdriver and you put it in there, and you can adjust your what's called the trim level on your speed. So you can adjust. Let me turn it off here. You see, it even has a battery meter. So let's see. It has a little bit of a tricky switch. You got to kind of get it just in the right spot, and then it comes on. And now there we go. Okay, so it tells you the battery's on and whether it's pretty well charged. And you can tune your steering and your speed control right in here, and it also has the switches again. So if for some reason when you hooked the wiring up, it was going, when you pulled forward, it went in reverse, now you can just hit a switch and it will correct it for that particular vehicle. And if you use this remote, you can use this remote with a different vehicle that has the same frequency, because it's not the gigahertz type frequency. It's not digital. It's analog. So if you have to switch it again to switch it for another vehicle, because it turns the speed or the turning works differently, you can just use the switches, and you can do everything, adjust things from the remote. So it's really nice that way. And again, you have a really long antenna because it is 75 megahertz, not like 2.4 gigahertz, which is much, much higher. So that is the Big Bubba story. I've got some other things I'm going to show you before we get to actually racing them around. All right, so here we are again. We're going to compare simple with complex. So over here on my right, this is another New Bright truck, and it does run on the same battery pack, 6.4 volt, but originally it did come with the larger 6 volt that will no longer charge, but this one actually is a little bit more forgiving, and we can get that 6.4 volt on there, and it seems to work fine. This is a very light. This is probably at the most 2 pounds. Everything's light on New Bright. That's really where New Bright started to shine, I suppose, is they started working with a lot of designs and parts that were lighter and lighter and lighter. And the good thing about that is then you can use lighter electronics that don't require as much battery power. So your batteries can be lighter, so you can use less batteries, less materials. Now, you don't get some of the power and performance you got on the vehicles from the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, but for most people, good enough. So this is a transition period. This is when New Bright was still doing radio frequency. This is I think it's a 49 megahertz vehicle. Okay, not 2.4 gigahertz, which is what actually the Corvette is, a gigahertz. So you can't use another remote with that one. And so here is, this remote did not go to this vehicle, but it's a 49 megahertz remote, and it happens to work with this. So it's 6 wheels, but only the rear wheel works. And I want you to hear the steering. See, it's just all the way to the left, all the way to the right. You don't really hear any gear working, right? It's just boom, boom, like that, because it's not sophisticated. It's just a motor that's just pulling it all the way one direction and all the way to the other. There's really no gear in there. It's just the motor just turning one way and turning the other and pulling the plastic steering rods over, okay, and just moving like that. So very unsophisticated, but again, what's nice about actually New Bright is things are interchangeable. So this is the motor housing. It's a very light motor housing. It's a very small motor, so the running time is pretty good on these. So you might get 40 minutes, an hour out of it. One gear, so your motor is probably here, and then that goes to the gear, and the gear, there's the motors in it. It's a very small little motor here, like it's maybe 1.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. And that goes to, there's one gear here, and that goes to a larger gear. So it's a small gear to a big gear, so you get more torque. And then that turns those 2 wheels, which, as you can see, have no differential. And, it runs around just fine. And that's how that vehicle operates in simple manner. So now, getting more sophisticated, this truck right here, all right, I remember I got this. We went to a buffet, and we came out of the buffet, and there was a little hobby store that had these really nice RC trucks for about $125. And I picked this one up, and I love this truck. It's got the design of a rock climbing truck before rock climbing trucks, RC trucks, were even being made. So it has the floating axle. You have your drive shaft here. There's the motor. So it's got one motor that goes to a gearbox, goes to another gearbox that comes down to your drive shafts, and the drive shafts transfer the power into the wheels. Now, it's 4-wheel drive, but the motors are not hooked up through the drive shaft unless you turn them at the same time. So Big Bubba, remember, if I turn one wheel, all the wheels would move. This one's not like that. It releases. I believe what it is there's a differential gear in each one of these, and so that releases the power from the front axle. But then when you turn it like this, that is locking up the differential gear that's then turning this drive shaft, that's turning this drive shaft, that turns those wheels. And that's, I'm pretty sure that's what's going on there. But you see, if you look at a rock climbing RC vehicle, which I have a really good one that we'll show later, this is the same design where you have these, support bars for the axle, and then you have your spring suspension. You can see the springs up in there, and it's actually pretty springy, so you can see how that rocks around. And this car is very fast. Now what I did is I changed the body. It was just a little silver pickup body. I took that off and I found this cheapy little plastic car. This didn't even go to an RC car, it's just a little push car. And I made it so that you could clip it on so it would cover this big battery. So I put that big 7.2 volt battery inside there, and I strapped it down with Velcro straps, because originally it just used a little tiny battery and it would run out of battery power really quickly because it is a powerful vehicle. This is a remote. This is one of those remotes. It did not come with the vehicle. The remote that came with this actually went bad. It burned itself out. But because this is not 2.4 gigahertz, it is a 27 megahertz channel 1. So the 27 megahertz frequencies come in 6 channels, and if you have multiple remotes and you get a car and you can, keep track of which remote goes to what, you can use your different remotes for different vehicles, and you can tell that's fast, right? And you have your trim adjustments here. Watch this. So you push that down. So see, you want to get that in the center so it's not moving on its own. You put that in the, you find the center point, and then that way you can just use your lever. And that's the same thing with the steering. So this is how you adjust the steering on these more sophisticated vehicles. So watch, I'm going to push this over and you're going to see, look at the wheels. Look at these wheels, they're going to turn. See how they turn slightly? So you want to get it in the center, right? Like a front end alignment on a real car. So this is your aligning, your remote aligner. It doesn't have like a little lever to align things. You do it from the remote, and then you can turn your wheels. And of course, this is digitally proportional steering, digitally proportional speed control. You can go relatively slow to crazy fast, 4-wheel drive. And this remote also has the switches, and I did have to use it. Here's your switches to switch whether it's turning to the left or right, and switching your speed, whether it's going forward or reverse. And actually, this remote, I do use it for other vehicles, and I wrote them on here. So this is the Venom. This is my Venom car. Actually, the original remote was a Venom, and then whoa. And then I have, you know what? I can't read my writing right now, but there's another. Oh, I'm just actually writing a note to myself. Reverse channel. Reverse channel. But it also works for something called the Black Bullet and the Gladiator. So those are the other vehicles that this remote. When I get those vehicles out, I just use the same remote, and it has your battery meter on there. It tells you it's fully charged, and it runs on 8 AA's inside there. So that is that car. And a little bit I want to show you about batteries, a little bit more on a charger here that I have over here. Because you can't get this charger any longer, and I'm really glad I bought it. It was expensive at the time. I think it was around $50. And I thought, I should get this because I'm going to probably use it for years. And so what this is a Radio Shack multi-battery charger. It does NiCad and nickel metal hydride, 4.8, 6 volts, 7.2, and 9.6. So check this out. This battery here, this is like 30 years old. This is a Radio Shack 7.2 volt battery. This is 1200 milliamps. that's NiCad. That's like the best technology. They might have gone up to like 1500, 1700 at one point in milliamps. But this was your Turbo Racing battery pack 30 years ago. It won't charge any longer, but I just keep it around for old time's sake. And the way that would charge up is you would plug this in here, and then you lock it in here, and it has a heat sensor in case the battery's going to overheat and explode, just like a Tesla. You can put that in there, and then that'll sense if the battery's getting too hot and it'll shut it off. So I've never had that happen, fortunately. But you can charge up. The 9.6 volt does the same. So, you can see that, and it plugs in there. It only plugs in one way, and then, that's going to fit in there. And then your 6-volt battery would charge that way. And your 4.8-volt battery actually charges in the same spot. So, yeah, that's what it does. Oh, and if you take it out on the road, so it plugs into your home, but it also has a cigarette lighter, which I've never used. It's been in the bag for probably 25 years. But there's your cigarette lighter adapter, so you can use your charger that way. It charges the batteries up in like 15, 20 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. It's a very fast charger. And here I also have a Radio Shack battery tester, which I've kept all these years too, probably like close to 30 years. You can put your 9 volts in, your AA's, your AAA's, and your 6-volt batteries fit across there, tell you if they're charged. And then it has your 9.6 and 7.2 volt battery. You can switch it and you plug it in there, and it tells you how the battery's doing. So I'm going to do that. Let's do that at 9.6 volt. I believe this one is charged up, and we will verify that. So you just plug that in, and then take a look, and then there, it tells you it's good. Now, it never really goes past. It never really goes far into the green. So when it's just right there, that's charged. All right, so that is the technicals on these RC cars. One more thing I want to tell you about on the Corvette. I forgot to tell you that the Corvette does have a little bit of a speed control. So you have your forward, you have your reverse, right? And then this is your steering, but you have a turbo button. And you push that button, and it doubles the speed of the vehicle. And it'll allow it to spin donuts. So that's the last thing I want to tell you about the technicals. And then I'm just going to race the cars around and show you. All right, thanks. All right, so I have a bonus vehicle to show you before we get started on our RC car run. This is a big van. It is a Volkswagen van. And it has monster tires and a monster suspension on it, but it really has no real springs to the suspension. It has big squishy tires. This I got a couple of years ago. It was a clearance, and it's rear-wheel drive, and it has a pretty good-sized gearbox over here, and you can hear that in there. Now it does not have a differential. So they spin both at the same time. It is a soft rubber, so I like that. It's not a sophisticated steering mechanism. Just sounds like a pretty good sizable motor. You can tell kind of just by how it sounds. And then here's your steering rod right there in the front. I guess there's no bumpers, so I guess they really weren't concerned about it going fast enough to hit that and break it. And that's pretty reasonably true. Plus the tires are going to hit something first as well. And the body is made out of Lexan, which is a really light plastic, and it has the 2.4 gigahertz remote, so it has to match up with this vehicle. The other reason why everything went to the 2.4 gigahertz frequency in RC cars is so that you could run multiple cars at the same time and not interfere with the frequency, because each remote goes only to that particular car, where, as I've indicated, if you have a 27 megahertz or a 49, someone else might have a 27 or 49. It's the same frequency, and they would interfere with each other, and then you would lose control. Now, what's fun about this vehicle is the green Corvette, you know, as I showed you, it charged up, it had a USB cable and it charged up inside the vehicle. This uses a USB to charge up the battery, and then the battery connects to this little connector here. So I'm going to show you that. See how deep that pit is in there? So here's the battery. And this is a 7.4 volt, 850 milliamp lithium ion battery. It's very light. You know, it's really the size of two AA's. So each battery in here is 3.7 volts. So together, you know, it's 7.4 volts. And it charges up. It came with a special USB. You see the electronics in there? So it has this special USB to 7.4 volt charger, because normally you get 5.4 volts out of a USB, but this is a little bit more. So it has to upgrade. Well, it has to take the 5.4 that's coming out of your USB and upgrade it to a 7.4, which you know, can be done. And then here's your remote, and it's the pistol grip remote that does not, you know, this is your steering, right? And then it does not have, this looks like it's a turbo button, but does not have turbo. So we're going to get to see this run too today. What I like about this truck is it's kind of funny to me. Like, it's, in one way, it's dumbing things down, right? It's kind of like that 30-year-old Big Bubba. It's got the big tires, the big squishy rubber, no working suspension. It's not four-wheel drive. It has the higher frequency remote, which is sophisticated. It has the lithium-ion batteries, which are sophisticated, but no suspension. It's nowhere near as powerful, but it looks cool, and it is fun to play with, and it will run for a pretty long time, probably an hour with this battery. And you know, when you compare, this is a 7.2 volt battery, and this is a big 7.2. This is 7.4. It's significantly lighter, but remember our discussion on running people through a tube. This is meant to be used with a vehicle that is much heavier and has a lot more weight behind it that you're going to have to stop. This truck here, the Iron Rhino, is light. It's kind of heavy though for cars today because the tires are heavy, but this is probably about 2.5, 3 pounds at the most. And it doesn't have a whole lot of speed. But it does have a low gearbox, so it does have a good amount of torque, and you're going to see that. So I'm going to stop the remote here and get our first vehicle going. Stop, I mean a camera, and we'll see you in a second. Okay, so first we're going to see the Nico Striker vehicle from the mid-2000s. And that uses the 7.4 volt lithium battery. You can see it's got some torque on there. You can see the wheels spinning a little bit, you know. But it's not that light for that battery, but that battery seems to be up to the challenge. And, you know, this is probably a 3-4 pound vehicle. And actually, my dad was an electronics engineer, and this was his. He would sometimes buy RC vehicles and take them apart. And he'd done his thing, I guess, with this, and handed it over to me. So there's that vehicle. So, you know, you have your independent steering. So when the vehicle is stopped, you can actually steer it independently. That actually was not a feature that was always available in the 90s. A lot of times you had to the car had to be moving in order to steer, and then they fixed that. So that was a nice change. And next, we're going to use that same battery pack for our really light 6-wheel drive New Bright truck. Okay, so this is our New Bright 6-wheel drive truck. The tires are more sticky than the Nico Striker truck. So you can see it though, it's still peeling out, but it's slower and it's lighter. So it is not as powerful as a vehicle. And this is newer. This is definitely, I'd say, probably 2015-ish. So, you know, it's lighter, has stickier tires, uses the same battery pack, but does not have the power of the older Nico vehicle. And that doesn't surprise me because honestly, Nico made awesome radio-controlled vehicles. They made almost hobby-grade RC vehicles, and we're going to see that soon when I do my next show on the really great Radio Shack branded Nico vehicles that I have. So I have a lot of 30-something year old vintage vehicles like that. So there are so many more RC vehicles and technology to go over with you. So we are nowhere near done. And that is how the New Bright vehicle works. And now we'll move on to our next New Bright vehicle. All right, so here's our big 2-speed high and low gear New Bright, older design. Like I said, I think this came out in the probably around 2010-ish, but the design is from the 90s, and that's when vehicles were just more powerful. So you can see it's got a lot of power. That's in low speed, and again, it will turn also when it's stopped. And you can see it's got quite a bit of torque, just rear-wheel drive. And that runs on the 9.6 volt battery pack. So, you know, more volts, generally more power, but it also depends on the gearing and the weight of the vehicle as far as what kind of performance and even, you know, tire size. Really just how everything is going to match up. And that is why I have over 100 radio-controlled vehicles, because they are all different, they all operate differently, and I just had to know how they all work, like how this one is better than this one doing this, and I just am very curious about the engineering, and I was able to get a lot of these things really cheap at secondhand stores and repair them and get them working and modify them often to make them even better. So that is our big New Bright truck. All right, and one of my favorite vehicles, Big Bubba. So here we go, 4-wheel drive, 7.2 volt battery, new electronics that I had to install, just to remind you. So here we go. Now that has the electronics where it doesn't let you go and slam it in reverse to protect the gearing, just, you know, as I was explaining in the previous video with the Camaro. But on your forward, look at the torque. All 4 wheels spinning out, you know, and then of course you can steer it, and you have your digitally proportional steering where you can steer just a little bit and you can move it slow. Now when the electronics that originally came with this, you could slam it in reverse and it would just go in reverse immediately, and you could just peel it out either way, like I could with that big New Bright. But this won't let you do it. But the advantage of the new electronics are I could take this thing outside. It will go faster than it used to, maybe another 50% faster than it originally came with. And so, you know, the gearing is protected by not allowing you to slam it in full reverse at full speed. Funny story about this truck. All right, so this is my Big Bubba that I've had for probably 32, 33 years. And a friend of mine had a Super Blackfoot, just like the Camaro, except he had the pickup truck body on it. And we were racing them in the street, and the Super Blackfoot goes like 25 miles an hour. And I was doing this thing, probably goes, you know, about 12 with the original electronics, and ran into the Super Blackfoot head on, and his truck hit this didn't move, and just flew over it and just started rolling and flipping and everything. And I did feel really bad because it broke something on the truck. I can't remember what, but you know, this is a really sturdy truck. This is, you know, a Nico truck, Big Bubba Nico. It used to, I actually installed working headlights at one time. It had red lights inside it. but they went bad, and then I just decided not to put them back on again. But there it is. That's Big Bubba. All right, so here is my Fast and Furious chassis, okay, that went to Dom's Black Dodge, and then I took that body off and I put this Corvette ZR1 body on it. Now that Black Dodge body is actually on another vehicle that we will eventually see that is a high-performance radio-controlled vehicle. So this, if you remember, has a turbo button. So now, I want you to hear the steering. Hear that? That is the sound of low-quality steering technology. That is just a simple motor that doesn't cut off. It just throws the wheel over one way, and it's straining. It's just like, but you know, it just doesn't, they just don't feel like it really matters with a vehicle this light. But it's pretty, you know, it steers immediately. So here we go, turbo. And you can do donuts. So this is not turbo. Okay, and then turbo. And then with turbo across the floor here. So you can't even hit full speed because it peels out. So it really only has two speeds. Slow and pretty fast. So not really a, you know, you have to have a lot of control to run this thing indoors. Mostly what you can do with it in turbo anyway is just, you know, have fun running it into a circle. All right, so that is our New Bright ZR1. Okay, so here is our Mean Machine Iron Rhino cute little monster truck. And you can see it's got a fair amount of torque. It's zippy. You know, just one speed. But it's fun. You can again, you could do donuts with this. Just about. Not quite as torquey as the Corvette, but you have those bigger tires that, the bigger the wheel, the less torque that you can have because it's a larger circle that you're trying to spin. So if you have a small circle, like a small wheel, with the same amount of torque that the motor can produce, that smaller wheel is going to have more torque than a larger wheel. But a larger wheel is going to have better ground clearance and be able to go over larger obstacles. And the gearing on this, like I said, if you'll notice in the back, it has a large gearbox. See that? So and that's why it has a lot of torque. This gearbox, as much as this was an inexpensive, simple little vehicle, it has a large gearbox, and you know, there's a lot of gears, big gears in there, whatever. So it has a lot of torque. So it's a fun little vehicle. And lastly, we will be seeing our most sophisticated vehicle for this show next. All right, so this is our Venom RC truck with a different body and different battery and different remote. The remote went bad, and the details on that are the Venom RC company was pioneering a technology that they hoped would become the norm, where you could put the batteries in a device in any direction and it would work. That it did work, but that remote ended up going bad. And so I had to replace it with this old Nico. This is at least 30 years old. This old Nico channel 1 27 megahertz remote that works for several vehicles. And you see those, the little wheelie wheels in the back on this truck? Those go to one of those balsa wood airplanes that it has a rubber band and you would wind the propeller up and you'd throw it and then it would go, and those were the wheels for it. They kind of help, but this truck's really powerful. And so if you're out on the street, it'll pop a wheelie and flip itself over backwards. But it is four-wheel drive, but it still pops wheelies. It has so much, torque. Now the heavier battery that I put, the big 3300 amp hour 7.2 volt battery, does help keep it on from flipping over as easily because it's got more weight. So it won't do a wheelie and flip itself over quite as easily, but it still will. And it does just give it a lot more running time because this is a very fast, probably about 20, 25 miles an hour, small little truck Great air-filled tires. They're real squishy. Excellent rock climbing style suspension where you have the single axle for the front and single axle for the back, but you have the long like trailer arm, like it has a long movement where the wheels can travel high up on the body so that it can traverse obstacles quite well. And with all that power that this thing has, you can see how you can just see the power. Watch, let me get this again. I mean, it's very powerful, very fast. And that is our most sophisticated vehicle for the day. I hope you enjoyed all of this and learned quite a bit. And there will be plenty of other series left to go. Part 4 coming up soon. Thanks for watching. GL1 out.